Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to go through a list of some science fantasy recommendations. I did the same style of video over on my main channel where I gave a list of sci-fantasy book recommendations, and as is common for full meta-analysis, I like to partner videos I do here with videos I do on my main channel, but then zero in on the other kinds of stories I like, so video games, manga, anime, movies, those sorts of things. And if you saw that video, I'll have a timestamp so you can just skip ahead of the intro and just get right into the meat of the recommendations. But I did want to go through a little bit what I'm categorizing as sci-fantasy so that you have an idea of what I'm looking at as criteria for things to fall within these categories. And then also I just want to say it was actually one of you who asked if I had any of these kinds of recommendations, and I asked over on my community tab on my main channel if the rest of you all had some recommendations. So if after watching this and my main channel's video you are looking for more recs, that community tab post you can find over on my main channel. But the definition of sci-fantasy that you can find online says science fantasy features worlds in which both science and magic work, or paranormal abilities are so pronounced they mimic magic, or the science is so advanced that it appears to be magic. It may be considered a hybrid of the two genres or a subset of either one, depending on the focus and intent. A simple version that I like to tell myself is, does it have space sorcerers or magic machines? And that alliterative way of describing it always helps me in deciding if I consider something to be sci-fantasy or if it's just science fiction or if it's just fantasy. So for all the ones I'm going to mention, they fall into this categorization. Some of them are video games, some of them are movies, so hopefully there's something here that piques your interest. The first one I'm going to start with is one that, for the most part, it is science fiction. Some of these are going to lean much more in one camp than the other, and that is true for this first one, but if I had known going into it that there would be an element of what is basically fantasy, because this science is unknown, and so it's pure speculation as to what would happen, and I do think this movie kind of explores the what if I had gone in knowing that, I think I would have liked the what if a lot more, and that would be Interstellar. So many of you probably have heard of Interstellar. If you've never seen it, in my opinion, this was probably Christopher Nolan's best movie. That's up for debate because The Dark Knight is phenomenal. But it's just very much this director's style, I think. And I was so captivated by this movie. When I was in the theater watching it, I remember so distinctly how I felt, and I literally had the thought in my mind, this is the best movie I have ever seen, as I was watching it. Matthew McConaughey's performance is phenomenal, as are many of the actors, of course, in this movie. The way it's shot is superb. The music, I'm sure you've heard it even if you don't realize it's come from Interstellar. Just captures that feeling of space and mystery and the what ifs in life. And music has such a way of transcending things, of capturing feelings, and it is very well utilized in this movie. And you follow this man who has the opportunity to explore something off of our planet. And doing this, though, means that he will be separated from his children. If they have any landings in certain areas where time is going to be different depending on the rotation of that place, then it means that you lose years and years and years. And so it's very dangerous and very high stakes. And even if you're safe, there's a chance that you could lose so much time with your family. But it's these dire circumstances on our own planet that leads Matthew McConaughey's character to go on this quest, you could say. And so much of it thus far probably sounds like science fiction. And if I were to reveal what I'm calling fantasy elements, I do think that it would potentially ruin the experience. So I don't want to say too much, but the definition that I was reading before, where when science is so advanced that it mimics magic, I definitely think that that is somewhat true of this one. At the very least, it's what if this is what science could do. And I think that exploration is why I would say this fits pretty comfortably into sci-fantasy. By the way, if you have any recommendations of anything that made you feel the way Interstellar makes a lot of us feel, please feel free to recommend them, because it doesn't even have to be sci-fantasy. Just anything that's just in your opinion on par with Interstellar, let me know, because I'm very picky when it comes to movies, and that movie was so good, and then the ending I was like, oh, I don't know, I don't like this ending, but I kind of want to rewatch it. I might like it more if I watched it again. Sticking with movies, the next one I'm going to say is Dune. So this is another one, and I would say maybe even more so than Interstellar. Maybe not. They both feel much more like science fiction. Part of what makes Dune especially cemented in my mind as science fiction, I think, is its origins as a science fiction novel that shaped the science fiction genre. So it's hard for me to remove it entirely from science fiction. But I do think that the way that the economy of the planet works and the way that the different cultures are depicted, the spice and the kind of abilities that it grants people, it has a feeling of fantasy to it. There's something about the way all those things are explored. I don't feel like I'm reading science fiction. I feel like I'm reading fantasy, or in the case of the movie, I feel like I'm watching a fantasy world unfold, but with the tech that comes with sci-fi and that kind of futuristic feeling that comes from sci-fi. But the almost house war type of feeling and the scheming and the manipulation, while that can be present in a variety of different genres, something about it just very much fits comfortably, in my opinion, with fantasy. So I think both Dune and Interstellar, if you're looking for something that scratches that itch that you could watch on a Friday night or whenever you like to watch movies, I think both of these would be great ones to check out. This next movie recommendation, I probably don't even need to say it, and I'm sure most of you know about it. And I'm not actually going to refer to the new one, I'm going to refer to the original, because when it came out, it was so kind of groundbreaking, and it was such an experience, and that would be Avatar. Obviously, the setup for the story is extremely science fiction based. You have these people going to this planet, and they're using technology to try and help them get to understand and know the individuals living on this planet. However, the planet itself, the visuals, the culture, the way that nature and the people are connected, everything about it is so vibrant and so colorful. It feels like what I want from a lot of fantasy, because fantasy can be anything. Fantasy can do anything, and you can be as creative as you want or as minimalistic with the fantasy elements as you want. And the visuals of this, it's so bright and vivid and vibrant, and it just feels like you're there, especially with when we were all kind of watching it for the first time. And if you've not seen it, then this might be a good opportunity to check it out. But so many of us, I think, went into that like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. It's so real looking. And I think that was exciting. And the plot is pretty generic, but it wasn't necessarily the plot, I feel, that was making this unique and so different. It was very much what it was doing with the sci-fantasy elements and the visuals of everything. There's a reason that it's one of the best performing movies of all time as far as, money goes. And it was really innovative. So if you've never checked out Avatar, while the story is not anything to be like, wow, I'm so moved, it's still, I think, kind of worth the experience. After that, I'm going to mention a couple of video games. So Final Fantasy, just the Final Fantasy franchise in general, I think is a perfect example of what I expect from science fantasy. And I don't know that I even really associated this term with this franchise because it's called Final Fantasy. In my head, it's fantasy. But so many of the different ones, because if you don't know, they're not direct sequels from each other if you've never played any of them. But there's so many things about them that are, of course, fantasy related, but then so much that is the kinds of questions you find in science fiction, the way in which technology clashes with morals or with the religion or with magic, the way that those things all kind of come against each other, and the way that mankind doesn't seem to know how to unite and work together. And so sometimes it can be used for the progression of society, or it can be used to deteriorate society, or it can be used as a weapon against society or a means of controlling people. And Final Fantasy VII, which I know there's a remake, and now the sequel to the remake is coming out, and it's not quite the same as the original, but this one in particular has such a futuristic feel to it. But then you have these machines, and you have the way these big corporations are taking advantage of the planet and they're draining it dry. And then you have magic also at the same time that people use, and it seems like this thing of the past. Also, I love the theories that 7 is a sequel to Final Fantasy X. If you've never looked into this theory, it's fascinating, and there's so many little Easter eggs that kind of hint that maybe that Final Fantasy X is a very distant prequel, which is really fun to explore. But anyway, Final Fantasy X also has where it feels so much more like fantasy in its setting, but then it's somewhat apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, and then you're seeing the way that these ancient civilizations and these machines played a role, which fits into my magic machines category. And of course, so many of them have the airship element. I just think the Final Fantasy franchise fits within this really well. If you've never checked it out, there's a number of them that, like I was using this phrase before, it'll scratch that itch for you. And then another video game I'm going to recommend would be Nier Automata. This actually is interesting in that I would say it's mostly sci-fi because it is kind of post-apocalyptic, futuristic, a lot to do with machines, a lot to do with what does it mean to be a person, what does it mean to have humanity, to have a culture, and to live. And while all of that falls into sci-fi, there are some aspects to it that feel more magical, especially when you realize that it is tied to Drakengard. I don't know how many of you know this or even know about this game. And if you do know this, then I'm not saying anything new here. But Drakengard was definitely fantasy, and it was so weird. And especially the ending with the babies. And this is very random, and I'm going off kind of on a side quest here. But the baby ending, I'm like, what is even happening? I remember being a kid and just thinking, like, what the heck is going on with this game? And then to find out that Nier Automata is, like, kind of related to Drakengard. It's sort of like Drakengard was the fantasy, and then you're looking at what can result in what the effects can be in the far future. And so it's kind of like if both these things are combined, it's sci-fantasy, but you're going to find sprinkles of science fiction in Drakengard, and you're going to find sprinkles of fantasy in Nier Automata. And also Nier Automata is just a great game, so definitely would recommend that one. And then we have a comic book that I wanted to mention, which would be Saga. I really don't have to say too much about this. It's a family who is on the run because the parents are of different races that are not meant to be together, but yet they find love with each other, and they have a child, and they are trying to protect each other and their daughter. And it feels just like fantasy in space. I don't know that I have to elaborate too much. That's really what it feels like. It's fantasy in space. So it's such a great mesh of both genres. In some of these, I've mentioned that they feel like they fit more in one than the other. This one is like perfect balance of both. I am going to say a tiny bit. I feel like Full Metal Alchemist could be considered within these categories as well, as its setting is more futuristic and modern, and a lot of their magic is sort of science-based, but then it is still magical in nature. If you don't know the setup, Full Metal Alchemist follows two brothers who tried to bring their mother back from the dead using alchemy, and their experiment went terribly wrong. One brother lost an arm and a leg, the other brother's entire body was lost, and his soul had to be attached to a suit of armor. And now these two are in search of the Philosopher's Stone to see if they can restore their bodies, and along the way, they are caught up in the military of their world, and a lot of other alchemists, and a lot of other interesting characters and plot lines, and maybe some darker, more sinister things lurking beneath it. It is fantastic. If you do check out Full Metal Alchemist, just know it starts, I would say, not indicating just how heavy and how meaningful it can be, because it starts out kind of campy and fun, but pretty quickly things start to get serious, so you might just have to push through a tiny bit. If you do watch the show, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood follows the manga pretty much perfectly, with a few things left out, of course. And then the other anime was actually made before the manga was finished, and so it kind of goes off in a different direction. And I definitely have found most people like the version that they watched first. Or if you read the manga, then you might like the anime that follows the manga more. And if you do watch Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the first episode is kind of like a pilot episode that is sort of random, so I always tell people you can technically skip it, but just know you might have to give it a couple of episodes before you really feel immersed and connected. And I am not a Star Wars person, but I just have to say, I know that a lot of people, when they think science fantasy, they think Star Wars. And so if any of you would like to elaborate on Star Wars, go more into it. I'm not the person to do that, but I know it does fit within this, so I felt it'd be almost wrong to not mention it. It felt weird to not at least acknowledge that it has so many ingredients of both genres baked in. And if you are a huge fan, you are of course welcome to talk about why you feel not just that it captures these two genres, but that it's kind of pivotal in shaping a lot of this this combo, this hybrid of these. But anyway, that's it for some sci-fantasy recommendations. I would love to know yours, as this is actually if you want to call it its own genre, that's what I'll do here. I really like this genre. I think it really captures what both of the others have to offer. And it has the creativity and the intrigue of both in a way that I think sometimes you don't get with the individual ones. But anyway, let me know your recommendations. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.